into kinship with beauty. The Smiths were rarely above the poverty level when they were in Vermont. And so the family, with what possessions they had, pack up a wagon and set out for Palmyra. The Finger Lakes region of New York looks like a human hand, and at the very center of the palm is the town of Palmyra. This region was promising economically because the Erie Canal was under construction, and there were hopes for a burgeoning of industry. This is where they came, hoping for a better life, for productive farming, and they began to clear the land. Now that takes an awful lot of work. In fact, a typical family could, if they worked daily for a year, clear up to 10 acres. The Smith family, meaning Father Smith and the 3 older brothers, cleared in 1 year 30 acres. So much for the stories that grew up about Joseph Smith, that he was lazy and shiftless and indolent. He was exactly the opposite. Imagine the difficulty of clearing land of trees, and then you have a problem when you cultivate of rocks or stone. There are 2 ways you can solve that. You can stack them up, or you can make walls. And you don't have to carry them very far if you make walls around the place you're cultivating. That's one of the reasons you see rock walls all through the land in New York and New England. Their livelihood depended on their sugaring from the maple trees, some crops from the land, and then hiring out to the various neighbors to dig wells or rock in walls or odd jobs. And Joseph thus becomes an essential part of keeping the family going. Their evenings spent in the cabin had components we would understand, but far different from today. They stayed warm near the hearth. They talked a good deal in conversation about the trends in the area, and of course the local stories, but also the religious developments. There are several ways that a family can become close-knit. One is just sheer economic need, where each is laboring for and in behalf of the others, and in effect they pool their resources. And that's one link in the Smith family. The second is their ultimate sense of the meaning of life. And we've pointed out that they had at least the beginning rudiments of a Christian commitment. But third, there was something about the Smith family, and I ascribe it mostly to the mother, that even in her initial years of bearing children and facing the usual issues with sickness and setback and education, Mother Smith had a spiritual power to convince them in their early lives that not only that they needed each other, but that they needed to be close in the triple sense of faith and love and sensitivity to each other. She herself was the model of that. And again, later in life, when Wilford Woodruff blesses her after the terrible losses in her family, he speaks of that and of her influence. And he doesn't use exaggerated language. He just says that as a mother in Israel, as the mother of the family, that was sent of God to begin this glorious movement, the Lord had singled her out, and that from her earliest experiences as a mother, she had demonstrated that she somehow sensed that without knowing the full outcome. They felt that and responded to it, and that's their unity. The surrounding culture of the Smith family in the 1820s and beyond was religious foment. This is the era of circuit riders who go into a town and preach and move on. This was the era of revivals and excitement. This was an era when individual joining of churches was far more free than it had been in an earlier time. It was also, which was what was disturbing to the young Joseph, a time of alienation in families, because one would go one way and the other another, and the loyalties they had to their churches sometimes superseded their unity as a family. And that happened in the Smith family. There were different views. Father Smith remained aloof from the revivals. Mother Smith and Hiram thought seriously of becoming Presbyterians. Joseph was apparently drawn closest to Methodism, but he was troubled deeply. He loved his family, he cared for their being together and in kinship, and he did not want to see this kind of division. So that leads to the ultimate question. What is the truth? What is the church or the religion? Hoping, I think, in his heart, the whole family could come together. The word heart reminds me that in one of his statements about this experience, he says it had never entered into his heart that all churches were wrong. He didn't ask the question, is there a church on the earth? He asked the question, which? He presupposed there had to be one at least. But he also says later that in his reflecting backward to what happened to him, were they all wrong together? So in his mind, he at least had the conception that could be the case. But in his heart, he did not want to consider that possibility. He wanted there to be one, and that one could draw the whole family. We don't know how much he actually attended or with whom revivals in this area. For some time, it has been said there was no revival in Palmyra or this exact area. We now know there was at least one in the 1820 period. There were others before in other areas and others after. But we do know that he says he felt like he wanted to feel what others felt, who said that they had found religion, or that they had got religion, or they had come to God. He wanted to feel that way and couldn't. It didn't take in him. Something felt amiss. I think we have far over-exaggerated the impact of the whole revival movement on Joseph. I think it went off him like water on a duck's back. The real motivation of his going into the grove was generated here. It's in the family and the concern he has for his own relationship and soul, and the fact that he's seeing his family pulled apart. The entire Smith family grew up with some presuppositions religiously, at least three. They all felt that they could trust the Bible. Mother Smith, confident the Bible is the basis of true religion, and so she has them read it. Secondly, they had some notion, at least together, almost unifying idea, that there was need for each person to find salvation. May not have been clear on what that meant, saved from what, saved for what, but the word salvation was in the air. And Mother Smith, early on, is herself concerned for her own soul. But third, it's clear that prayer was part of their lives, and that apparently Father Smith, who carried his spectacles in a pocket or a vest, when he took his spectacles out at night, that meant we will now pray. And we don't read that others in the family prayed. The assumption is that the mother and or the father prayed each night. So that was never really shaken. The Bible is our foundation. There is need for salvation, and we need to be prayerful. That's the spiritual root. I'm reminded of the comment of a Danish philosopher who said, it is one thing to stand on one leg and argue about the existence of God. It is another to go quietly to your knees and find him. Well, Joseph has, either by that or by the book of James or both, is moved to the point that he's saying, I need direction. And James says, if you lack wisdom, ask of God. He says that no passage of Scripture, try to convince us of how powerfully this affected, no passage of Scripture has ever affected a human being as that did mine. It sank into my soul. The passage goes on to say, and we don't quote it as often, whoever so asks, let him ask in faith. Well, Joseph apparently had innate faith in Jesus Christ. And to be counseled that he was able to seek wisdom and ask leads then to his going away from the crowd, away from the pressures of the revivals, and all alone in a grove, he cries out vocally to know. That prayer was answered not just because it was his prayer. Thousands and even millions of people before us and before him had cried out for guidance. He becomes the one who begins the answer to all of their prayers, which will eventually reach in its influence to the whole human race on both sides of the veil.